Everything began in a small town where a once thriving doll factory stood. Founded by Marisa, a talented artisan, the factory was an immediate success. Her dolls were unlike any others, with meticulous details and a touch of realism, charmed everyone. For years, the factory thrived, bringing joy to children from all corners. Marisa was admired and respected not just for her skill, but also for the love she put into each creation. However, time was relentless. With the advancement of technology and the arrival of more modern toys, the demand for Marisa's dolls began to decline. The factory that once buzzed with life and laughter was now empty and silent. The machines rusted, orders were rare, and Marisa felt the weight of impending bankruptcy. She found herself alone, fighting against despair and sadness, watching her precious creations gather dust on the shelves. Each passing day, the situation grew more desperate. Marisa sold her belongings, cut expenses, and still couldn't keep the factory running. Debts piled up, employees left their posts, and Marisa, a woman full of life, was now on the brink of collapse. On a cold night, while walking through the empty factory corridors, Marisa felt a presence. Something was watching her. She quickly turned around, but saw nothing. What Marisa didn't know was that this night would mark the beginning of something much darker than she could ever imagine. That night, Marisa could barely sleep. Feeling of being watched unsettled her, but she attributed it to stress and exhaustion. In the morning, upon returning to the factory, something strange caught her attention. In the middle of the production room, there was a doll she didn't remember making. It was a doll unlike any other, with deeply realistic eyes, almost alive, and an expression that seemed to change depending on the angle Marisa looked. Intrigued and a bit frightened, she picked up the doll. The material felt cold, almost icy, and a sense of discomfort ran through her body. Marisa spent the day trying to remember if she had ever created that doll. She went through her records, looked at her notes, but found nothing. It was as if the doll had appeared out of nowhere. As night fell, when Marisa was about to close the factory, she heard a whisper. It was a soft sound, almost imperceptible, but clearly coming from the doll. With her heart racing, Marisa approached. The whisper continued, now more clearly, "I can help you." Marisa stepped back, nearly dropping the doll. What was happening? Was her mind playing tricks on her? Gripped by a morbid curiosity, Marisa picked up the doll again. Its eyes seemed fixed on her, filled with a disturbing life. "What do you mean by help?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. But the answer came. The doll began to speak, voice soft and hypnotic. "I can bring back the glory and fortune you lost. I can make your factory thrive again." Marisa was terrified, but at the same time fascinated. How could a doll speak? And more, offer her a pact? At that moment, the dark and empty factory seemed full of shadows and murmurs. Marisa felt she was on the edge of an abyss, about to fall. The doll continued, "All you need to do is accept my help. But remember, every gift has its price." And so the seed of the dark pact was planted. Marisa couldn't get the doll out of her mind. That voice, those eyes, it was as if the doll was alive, patiently waiting for her to give in to temptation. For days, she avoided going to the factory at night, fearing to meet that penetrating gaze again. But curiosity and despair were strong. One night, unable to resist, Marisa returned to the factory. Doll was there, in the same place, as if it knew Marisa would return. Filled with a mix of fear and hope, she approached. "What do you want in return?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doll smiled. Yes, it smiled, a disturbing gesture on a porcelain face. "For your factory to thrive again, you must give me something in return. Something very valuable." Marisa felt a chill, but couldn't look away. "What would that be?" she whispered. The doll's voice was soft and seductive. "Children. The lives of children. We need their energies to bring back the glory you lost." Marisa stepped back, horrified. How could she consider such a thing? Sacrificing children? But at the same time, promise of regaining all she had lost was tempting. The following days were tormenting. Marisa tried to focus on work, but the doll's voice echoed in her mind. Bills piled up, creditors called incessantly, and her daughter asked why they couldn't buy simple things anymore. Despair grew every day. Finally, on a moonless night, Marisa made a decision. She returned to the factory, faced the doll, and with tears in her eyes said, "What if I accept? How will it work?" The doll, its eyes glowing in the darkness, replied, "Every month, a child will disappear. In return, your factory will flourish. But remember, the price is high and there's no turning back. Marisa felt an overwhelming weight in her heart. She was about to make a pact with something she couldn't even understand. But the promise of reclaiming her life, her glory, her factory was irresistible. With one last sigh, she closed her eyes and said, "I accept." And so the dark pact was sealed, plunging Marisa into an abyss of terror and regret she could never have imagined. After sealing the pact, Marisa felt a coldness take over her body, as if darkness itself had enveloped her. The next day, something strange began to happen. The factory, which had been without orders for months, started receiving calls and messages from old and new clients. The dolls, long forgotten, were suddenly in vogue again. Marisa could hardly believe what she was seeing. Orders flooded in, and she found herself working day and night to meet the growing demand. Her former employees returned, the factory came back to life, and soon the coffers began to fill. The doll's promise was coming true. However, with each new success, a shadow of unease grew within Marisa. She couldn't forget the price she had agreed to pay. The first disappearance occurred a month after the pact. A little girl from the neighborhood simply vanished without a trace. Police were called, searches were conducted, but no sign of the child was found. Marisa knew what had happened, but kept the secret buried in her heart. Every smile from her employees, every compliment from clients was a dagger to her conscience. She tried to justify it to herself, saying she had no choice, that it was for the survival of the factory and her family. Months passed, and with each new disappearance, the factory flourished even more. But Marisa could barely look into her own daughter's eyes. Guilt and fear consumed her. She began having nightmares, visions of the missing children, their voices echoing in her mind, pleading for help. One night, while walking through the factory, Marisa encountered the doll again. It was different, or sinister, almost alive. "You are fulfilling your part of the pact," the doll said, eyes gleaming with inhuman malice. "But remember, the final sacrifice must be the most precious." Marisa felt a lump in her throat. She didn't know what the final price would be. What could be more precious than innocent lives? Absolute terror consumed her, but the factory continued to grow, to prosper. She was trapped in a hellish cycle, not knowing how to escape. Every day was a battle against madness, against despair. Marisa was walking a tightrope, knowing that at any moment, fall would be inevitable. And deep in her soul, one question persisted. How far was she willing to go to maintain her success? And the answer, though terrible, was about to be revealed. The days of glory finally returned. Marisa's factory was at the peak of success, bigger and more prosperous than ever before. Store windows were filled with her dolls, and children, fascinated by the incredibly realistic toys, begged their parents for one. Marisa, always busy, seemed like a shadow of her former self. Although she smiled at her employees and customers, her smile was empty, her eyes dull. The weight of the disappearances gnawed at her inside, but she hid this from everyone. The town, on the other hand, celebrated the factory's revival, unaware of the dark sacrifices that sustained that success. The local newspapers couldn't stop writing about the factory's incredible turnaround. Interviews, reports, visits from influencers, everything seemed perfect. A true fairy tale. But Marisa knew she was living a nightmare. Each new sale, each compliment was a reminder of the grim pact she had made. Her daughter, Clara, noticed the change in her mother. Marisa was more distant, oscillating between moments of desperate affection and a chilling coldness. Clara, still young, didn't fully understand, but sensed that something terrible was about to happen. As the factory thrived, the disappearances continued, and each time a child vanished, Marisa withdrew further, trapped in a spiral of guilt and regret. The mysterious doll, now always present in her office, seemed to watch every move, every decision, as if savoring Marisa's torment. Marisa tried everything to find a way out. She sought priests, prayed, tried to undo the pact. The doll was always there, reminding her there was no turning back. Price had to be paid to the end. Factory's success was a golden cage, a prison where Marisa was condemned to live with her choices. The community, enchanted by the factory's rebirth, began organizing events to celebrate. Festivals, parades, everything revolved around Marisa's doll. And the more the factory shone, the darker Marisa's soul became. More and more, she found herself contemplating the inevitable. Pact required the most precious sacrifice, and Marisa knew time was running out. The factory was at its peak, but her life, her sanity were about to collapse. The promise of glory and fortune had been fulfilled. But at what cost? Marisa knew the end was near, and the choice she would have to make was more terrible than any nightmare she had ever had. Each month, the disappearance of a child was announced with despair and sadness by the community. Devastated parents, streets filled with posters of innocent faces, and investigations that always ended with no answers. Marisa, consumed by guilt, kept her dark secret, silently watching the suffering she had caused. On a silent night, Marisa was awakened by a peculiar sound coming from Clara's room. With a tight heart, she got up and walked toward her daughter's room. There, she found Clara holding the mysterious doll, talking to it as if it were a close friend. Marisa felt a chill as she heard Clara say, "Mommy will save us, won't she?" Marisa took the doll from Clara's hands and placed it deep inside the closet, shutting the door firmly. Clara, with innocent eyes, asked, "Mom, why are you sad?" Marisa, fighting back tears, just hugged her. "Don't worry, darling, everything is fine." But Marisa knew nothing was fine. The doll in Clara's life was a constant reminder of the final price she had to pay. Would the final price be her beloved daughter's life? Each day, Marisa felt closer to despair. She knew the sacrifice was approaching and an impossible decision had to be made. One night, the doll spoke to Marisa again. "Time is running out. You know what needs to be done." Marisa felt absolute terror, but the doll's voice was relentless. "The last child must be your daughter. Only then will the pact be complete." Marisa spent the night awake, wrestling with the inevitability of the decision. At dawn, with red eyes and a heavy heart, she made her choice. He took Clara by the hand and led her to the factory. Clara, innocent and trusting, followed without question. Inside the factory, Marisa guided Clara to the room where the doll was. Clara looked at the doll and then at her mother, sensing the tension. "Mom, why are we here?" Marisa, tears streaming, replied, "Because I love you more than anything in the world." Marisa knew she couldn't go through with it. She couldn't sacrifice her own daughter, even if it meant losing everything. With a desperate scream, she grabbed the doll and smashed it against the wall, shattering it to pieces. A black shadow emerged from the shards, screaming in fury before vanishing into the darkness. Marisa fell to her knees, hugging Clara tightly. "It's all right now, darling. It's all right." But deep down, she knew something darker was lurking. The silent sacrifice had been made. The real battle was just beginning. The darkness within Marisa was profound, and the price she had to pay was not fully revealed. The days following the doll's destruction were strangely calm. The factory continued to operate, orders still came in, and for a moment Marisa believed it was over. She thought destroying the doll had broken the pact and saved her daughter. But over time, small details began to disturb her. Factory workers, once lively, now seemed apathetic and distant. The dolls produced had an eerie, almost sinister air, as if something evil had infused them. One night, while reviewing documents in her office, Marisa heard a series of soft knocks. She looked around but saw no one. The knocks continued, stronger, coming from inside the walls. With a racing heart, she followed the sound to an old closet, locked for years. With trembling hands, she opened the door and found an old, dusty box. Inside it was a doll identical to the one she had destroyed. Marisa fell back, consumed by terror. The pact was not broken. It had merely changed form. The real battle was just beginning, and the shadows she had tried to banish were closer than ever. Inside the cabinet, she found a doll that looked exactly like the one she had destroyed. However, this one had a more vivid and frightening expression. As she picked up the doll, Marisa felt a wave of cold pass through her body. The doll opened its eyes and whispered, "The pact is not yet complete." Marisa dropped the doll, her hands trembling. How was this possible? She had destroyed the doll, broken the pact. But now the doll's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of the price that still needed to be paid. In the following days, Clara began to exhibit strange behaviors. She talked to herself, and her eyes sometimes reflected a darkness that shouldn't have been there. Consumed by fear, Marisa sought help from priests and experts, but no one could explain what was happening. One night, Clara disappeared. Marisa searched desperately throughout the house and the factory, shouting her daughter's name. Finally, she found Clara in the production room, surrounded by dolls that seemed to be watching her. Clara looked at her mother with a disturbing smile and said, "Mommy, they're here to take me." Marisa tried to grab Clara, but the dolls began to move, their porcelain hands gripping her tightly. Desperate, Marisa fought against the dolls, trying to free her daughter. But the more she struggled, clearer the truth became. Pact could not be undone. Clara was taken to the center of the room, and the dolls formed a circle around her. Marisa, powerless, watched as a dark shadow emerged from the dolls, enveloping her daughter. "No," Marisa screamed, her voice echoing through the factory. It was too late. The shadow disappeared, taking Clara with it. Marisa fell to her knees, devastated, knowing she had lost the most precious thing in her life. The dolls, now motionless, seemed to mock her suffering. Marisa stayed there, in the darkness of the factory, realizing that the true revelation was even more horrific than she could have imagined. The pact had been fulfilled, but the price had been much higher than any wealth or success could justify. And in the silence of the factory, Marisa knew she would never be the same. The pain of loss, the weight of guilt, were burdens she would carry forever. Factory, once shining as a beacon of hope and success, was now shrouded in oppressive darkness. Marisa, broken by the loss of Clara, wandered through the empty corridors, a shadow of her former self. Her steps echoed like laments in the vastness of the place, and every corner seemed to whisper the horrors of the pact she had made. Time passed, but the wound in her heart never healed. Marisa avoided the production room, where she had often heard her daughter's laughter. Factory continued to operate, but for Marisa, everything was empty and meaningless. The dolls were still made, sold, and adored, but she knew they were imbued with something evil. One night, unable to sleep, Marisa went to the office where the resurrected doll was stored. Its eyes stared at her, full of cruel knowledge. "Why?" she whispered, her voice faltering. "Why did you take my daughter?" The doll didn't respond. The room filled with a supernatural cold. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and Marisa heard a soft, familiar, and painful laugh. Clara. Her daughter's laugh echoed through the walls, like a ghost trapped between two worlds. Marisa followed the sound, her heart pounding wildly. She reached the production room where she saw Clara standing in the center, surrounded by dolls. "Mommy, why did you do this?" Clara asked, her voice soft and full of pain. Marisa fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know. I thought I was doing the right thing." Clara approached, her small cold hand touching Marisa's face. "You condemned us all. Now we are all trapped here forever." Marisa felt the weight of her daughter's words like a blade piercing her heart. She looked around, seeing the dolls move, their empty expressions becoming increasingly lifelike, each representing a lost child. The horror of reality hit her with crushing force. She hadn't just lost Clara. She had condemned all those children to a fate worse than death. The dolls, once inanimate, were now filled with the souls of the missing children, prisoners of her insane pact. Desperate, Marisa screamed, a sound that reverberated through the factory, a cry of pure despair. She took Clara in her arms, feeling the coldness of her body, and began to plead for forgiveness, for a way to undo what she had done. But there was no forgiveness, no redemption. Pact was fulfilled, and the price paid. The dolls, now filled with macabre life, began to laugh, their voices united in a symphony of terror. Marisa felt her sanity unraveling, her mind fracturing under the weight of guilt and horror. The factory, once a symbol of her skill and success, became her eternal prison. Marisa was condemned to wander the dark corridors, haunted by the ghosts of the children she had sacrificed. And at the center of it all, the doll, with its porcelain eyes, watched, an eternal reminder of the final price she paid for her ambition. Thus, Marisa's story became an eternal lament, a warning to all about the dangers of making pacts with forces we do not understand. And the doll factory, though still in operation, held a macabre energy, whispered on cold, dark nights when the shadows seemed to move on their own. If you were thrilled by Marisa's story and her dark pact, don't miss the chance to delve deeper into the world of horror. Subscribe to our channel for more terrifying tales that challenge the mind and provoke the deepest fears. Here, you'll find narratives that will captivate you and make your heart race. If you love stories that mix suspense, mystery, and the macabre, this is your place. Join us and don't miss the upcoming stories that promise to leave you disturbed. Subscribe now and enter the world where terror becomes reality.